also happened, though, was a murder, a 2-year-old little girl wandering around the park without any adult with her, stabbings, and unfortunately, a lot of very, very challenging situations.
Well, that's King County Council member Jean Cole-Wells talking about some of the alarming details regarding City Hall Park just outside the King County Courthouse, also laying some groundwork, really, for a public hearing this week where we will hear plenty of people sounding off about transferring this park to King County ownership. We're going to discuss that, plus a new transportation director possibly for the city of Seattle, dealing with a backlog of sexual assault cases for the Seattle Police Department, and so much more. That's what's coming up this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are my own. And I am joined right now by none other than David Croman of the Seattle Times. David, ferry boat madness over this past week. You had a boat crashing into the Fauntleroy dock, the captain resigning. What the ferry is going on here? Let me know.
I know. It's a little it's got some intrigue to it. I don't know. We're still trying to figure out exactly what happened, but I'm sure there will be more to come in the days and weeks ahead.
Ooh, wow. Watch out. Blood in the water. I can't wait for the headline. We'll see what happens there. Thank you, David, as always, for joining me. Thanks to our listeners. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast, right on the first floor of City Hall there. And thanks also to our patrons. A huge shout out to Rob with a very generous gift to the podcast. Thank you, intern Rob. Going to get a photo from you later on. He is supporting the show above the $10 level, which earns him a Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug. You can get one too. We'll feature your mug shot on the show. Patrons, just send in that photo to Seattle News, Views, and Brews at gmail.com. Spell out all those words. I believe in you. This week, Lily sent in a beautiful summertime shot with bubbles blowing in the background. Lily, I love it. Thank you so much for sending that in, and thank you for supporting the show. So everybody, why can't you be more like Lily? If you listen, please become a patron at any level. That's Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Finally, thank you to Converge Media. The video of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday evenings at 7. All right, let's fire it up with right here, right now. Well, hello, August. Here we go. Make sure you get out and vote in the primaries. We're going to check out on the aftermath next week with what's happening there. And thank you, listeners, for the feedback on keeping the audio clean on the podcast. Constant work in progress there. Thanks also for the note about the Seattle Redistricting Commission. They have a retreat this week to look at some new maps. We will definitely keep an eye on that process. But I wanted to start, David, with City Hall Park. There's a public hearing this week within the Public Assets and Homelessness Committee for City Council there, talking about what's happening here, this idea to transfer the park to county ownership. It's right outside the county courthouse, so the county would transfer a few other land parcels to the city as part of a land swap. I know we've touched on this issue before, but I'm really interested in what we're going to hear in this public hearing. Homelessness, of course, is the issue that is front and center, and the public safety issues that surround that. And David, I guess I'm trying to figure out, is there a case to be made for this park to remain as a city property? It seems like thus far the city and county are fairly supportive of making this happen. What do you think?
Yeah, I think my sense is the kind of the reason there's I guess some logic to it, just because it really the concerns around public safety down there are really focused on the courthouse and the county buildings, as you'd mentioned, and so I think there's a certain amount of logic to transferring it to the county. As far as an argument in favor of keeping it in the city, the city lately has been kind of the one leading a lot of these big outreach efforts to parks like Woodland Park, and other public spaces where there have been a lot of homeless encampments, and sort of partnering with local organizations to do a lot of outreach and try and get those people into housing, and have actually done that in City Hall. I suppose I don't know if the transfer would prevent the city from continuing to do that, but I suppose there's an argument that this strategy that people like Councilmember Lewis are touting of just kind of intense, prolonged outreach before you kind of make people leave the camp. I suppose that keeping it in city hands perhaps could make that easier. I don't know, though. I'm sure the county would be okay with the city doing work in their park also. So
Sure, sure. And I mean, think about it. The King County Regional Homelessness Authority is supposed to be the governing agency that's trying to bring all this different effort together around homelessness. So that's part of the puzzle too. And I did want to point out, I think it's important to point out, a public hearing is happening here after a lot of pressure from advocates not to rush this process. For background here, folks, city and county leaders have been talking about this space since 2017, working on activating it. The pandemic ended up pushing resources elsewhere, and now here we are. But we had this report from the county executive's office in January of 2021. And I think after that came out, there was a lot of concern that the space would not remain a public park. Jean Cole Wells has said, she said it in the council meeting, this will remain a park in perpetuity. As I understand it, there may be some language the council needs to clean up to ensure that's exactly what's written in the deal. But David, you brought this up. We've watched challenges like this unfold at places like Ballard Commons in the city of Seattle here, still gated off, waiting to reopen. How does the county or any agency build back better when it comes to a public park here? It's not like our homelessness crisis is over or COVID. We're not done with that either.
No, yeah, I mean that's kind of the million dollar question, and this
Yeah.
is a particularly, it's challenging in any park, because it really comes down to space.
Mhm.
This preferred outreach mechanism to these kind of hotspot parks now is this sort of prolonged, intense outreach. You
Yeah,
you try and get, you take as much time as you need. You try and get as many people into housing as you can, but
sure.
that that's good in theory, and when there is space for people to go, it
Right.
works. But the
Mhm.
question being, how much space is there for people to land is
Yeah.
always perennially out there. And
Yeah,
then,
and yeah.
I think this area too is perhaps maybe a little bit more challenging than even Ballard or
Mm.
Woodland Park, because
Yeah, yeah.
it's in that area where there's, the DESC shelter,
Yep.
and
A lot of resources in there, you bet. Mhm.
so it is, as you would expect. A lot of folks head down there to get those resources,
Mhm.
and so then it's, distinguishing between, maybe a lot of the folks are just there, like spending their lunch break in the
Sure,
same way
right,
where I would use that park. So sort of who is allowed in that park and who is not is
right.
really a hairy question, and really gets at the heart a lot of these complicated kind of issues of public camping and parks and things like that.
Right, right. It's not there's gonna be some gate out there where people are asking, "Are you homeless or not?" I mean, that's
Yeah,
not
exactly.
the way the public parks work, and I wonder how that's gonna be unfurled here in terms of trying to make this into an activated park where, uh, perhaps camping, etcetera, would, certainly not be encouraged, and how do you do that? I'm very interested to see how the county's gonna do that, very interested to see what advocates are gonna be saying over the next couple of days here with regard to this, but some big decisions ahead for the city and county when it comes to this. All right. I wanted to make sure I touched on that. And I think a related issue here, David, is trying to activate more areas of the downtown space. And we're hearing a lot more about this week from the mayor. He is talking about working with the Seattle Office of Economic Development, OED, there, investing nearly $2 million in coronavirus local fiscal recovery funding, as he's calling it, in the Commercial Tenant Improvement Fund. Basically, he's doing this through an open application process. You put in the grant application there. These small businesses could get up to $100,000 to build out commercial spaces, make commercial improvements, and make these projects more affordable, located within Seattle city limits. I just look at this, David, and I wanted to bring it up because it seems like the mayor is trying to bring back business, bring them back online as quickly as he can. What impact do you think these different type of grant programs might have on different businesses around our area?
Yeah, it's a little confusing to me. I don't understand exactly how this works, because I know that the state explicitly forbids gifts of public funds to
Right.
private entities, which is, at least from city money.
Yeah.
And which is a thing that has come up a lot. The best example I can think of is when they were redoing 23rd Avenue. I think it was 2016 or something like that.
Hmm.
There were a lot of concerns about the construction impacts on the businesses there, and
Right.
it came up a lot where, the city is pretty limited in how much it can just sort of fork over
Yeah.
to these businesses to help
Hmm.
them stay. But where they can kind of use some of this money is in some of this peripheral support. And then also, I think if they can find federal dollars to do
Right.
it, you can give more direct funding. So I mean, where this money is coming from, and how it's going to help these businesses, I'd be curious to see.
Yeah.
Um, we know that for Mayor Harrell, it's a clearly a big priority to kind of try and
Oh, yeah.
zhuzh up downtown, if you will,
Yeah. Yeah.
which we have seen him do via, we've heard him kind of push a little harder for city employees to come back into the
Hmm.
office.
Yeah, sure.
The city employees have countered saying the only reason you're doing this is because you are trying to bring business downtown, which
Yeah.
might not be untrue.
No,
Uh,
no, there's some truth to that.
and so, yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's a big priority for Mayor Harrow
Hmm.
to bring back downtown, but like he's kind of paddling upstream to a certain extent because
Mm.
it really depends on, are people going to come back to the office? And so far, the answer is basically no.
Yeah, not yet. That's for sure. And I thought it was interesting, and I think he's reaching out with a lot of this money when you talk about that public gift part as part of a coronavirus effort. He's couching it in that way with those dollars there. But this really dovetails with some other ideas here. He's working on providing a dashboard to show the public where the COVID dollars are going for the city of Seattle. And also, this effort he's pushing again to bring back businesses. And this is all over the city called Seattle Restored. And I thought this was interesting because initially we heard about this a couple of months ago. The mayor was saying, hey, these businesses that are vacant downtown, how about some other people come in? Maybe not a traditional business that we'd have here, but we want to make sure we're filling these spaces. Here's some dollars to help make that happen. Now he's talking about expanding that into other neighborhoods as well. So this really strikes it in relief for me, David, that it's not just a downtown issue. This is something that's happening in neighborhood business districts all over the city of Seattle. They're all trying to recover here. Yes, downtown's important, but I think there are some neighborhoods that could use some help here as well.
Yeah, I agree. In some ways, it feels like City Hall's role here, though, is, as I was saying before, a little bit window dressing to
Okay,
much larger forces that will kind of dictate how
that's
what the
fair.
city looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, the Downtown Seattle Association a few months ago was predicting 70% return to the office by the end of the summer, and I don't think it has budged an ounce from then when
No.
it was 30%. I think it's still
Yeah,
about 30% vacancy, and so
right.
I think that what we have heard more of, though, is some acknowledgement of that and questions about, okay, so how do we? And I think this goes to what the mayor is talking about, is
Yeah, yeah.
how do we kind of rethink these spaces so that something like downtown is not a place where less of a place where people come in from other neighborhoods or even other
Mhm,
cities to
mhm.
visit and spend some time and then they go
Right,
back.
right.
How do you kind of turn it more into a neighborhood or
Yeah,
an arts district where
sure, sure.
um, either A, you have a reason to be there other than going into the office,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
or B, you live down there and you
Right.
use it as you would in a neighborhood. And um, at least anecdotally, while downtown businesses, I think, are still probably having a hard time, you hear about restaurants on Capitol Hill and stuff.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I've got family who they actually sell oysters to businesses, like restaurants around Seattle, and
Oh, there we go.
their business is booming. They're so a lot of these neighborhood restaurants are actually doing okay.
Okay, okay.
And I think it's because people are just not going as far from where they live anymore. They work from
That
home, and
could
then at night
yeah,
they
sure.
just walk out their door and go to the restaurant. And
Certainly
uh,
happened in West Seattle with the pandemic and the bridge closure, but yeah, I hear what you're
yeah,
saying.
so I think it's a fascinating question that you can kind of get into 5,000 foot
Yeah.
view on pretty quickly of
Mhm.
what is Seattle? I mean, how do you kind of what is its identity, and is it going to
Mhm.
be kind of more neighborhood focused and
Yeah.
less of a central downtown hub that people come into?
That is a great question, and we'll see what these dollars do. Will they make a difference downtown? Will they make a difference in other neighborhoods too? It's a very open question. I thank you for bringing up that 5,000 foot level, David. That even felt like 10,000 to me. You
Yeah.
took a nice jump back there. I did want to point out there's plenty of other stuff on the city council's docket this week. They're talking about repealing the hazard pay ordinance. They're talking about those caps on food app delivery services. So ton going on here. We discussed these before. The full council is approving those this week. But I wanted to move to another very important issue here. Seattle has a new SDOT director that the city council is in the process of approving. What do you need to know about this candidate that Mayor Harrell picked? We're going to break it down here on Now Hear This. Well, Seattle has a new candidate to lead the Seattle Department of Transportation, Greg Spotts, selected by Mayor Bruce Harrell. Now, Spotts has been with the Los Angeles Bureau of Street Services for the past 10 years, now known as Streets LA. Mayor Harrell was highlighting Spot's work in equity, community outreach, and climate change. And Spot said he's going to be traveling all over the city over the next few weeks to tout these ideas. But he got some advice from a member of the mayor's senior staff about this. Here's what he had to say.
When I met Senior Deputy Mayor Monisha Harrell, she told me it's not a campaign unless you wear out a pair of shoes. Well, I intend to wear out a pair of shoes, walking, biking, and riding transit with Seattleites, asking residents to show me what's working and what needs improvement.
Well, I'm sure he's going to get an earful from a lot of people about what needs improvement. But David, I wanted to ask you this. You interviewed Greg Spots recently about this. What did you come away with in terms of how he's going to respond on the multitude of transportation challenges in the city? He's got to work on a ballot proposal. He's got to figure out how to interact with Sound Transit. There's a lot of things on the list. West Seattle Bridge. I mean, you name it. What was he saying to you?
This selection, I thought, I don't want to say I was surprised because, but it's interesting because I think on the campaign trail, there, I think in the kind of world of like urbanism and people who are very strongly kind of pedestrian and bike advocates and sort of advocates for thinking of transportation more holistically and not just about cars.
Not car centric, yeah.
Those folks were, I think, a little bit concerned about Mayor Harrell because at one point, at least in a debate, he had said something about how, we can't forget about cars and we need, that needs to be part of the conversation. And then comes Greg Spots and his history is actually really, I would say it's about as kind of urbanist focus as I've ever heard from an SDOT director. I mean, he's pretty explicit about transportation departments can no longer be, and he talked about transportation departments can no longer be kind of that vision of the 1950s master plan community. It's no longer just about fostering commutes via cars. That really transportation departments are need to be thinking about who is using the streets and how do you share that space, and even kind of dipping into questions about zoning and sort of urban planning and how that impacts transportation. And one of the first things he brought up was the Vision Zero goals have not been met for pedestrian and bike deaths. So it surprised me in two ways, which is he really brought, I thought, his own kind of perspective and priorities to this in a way that sometimes when there's a new director nominated, they basically say, I'm
the mayor's person. Yeah,
exactly. I'm here at the pleasure of the mayor, and I carry out his or her vision dutifully. He was pretty. I thought he was pretty. He had a fairly clear viewpoint that I thought came through that seemed to live independently of Mayor Harrell's viewpoint, which I thought was interesting. And just his focus. He didn't talk that much about cars. He really only talked about bikes and pedestrians and safety and things like that, and really took this again very holistic view of transportation in a way that I think having followed Mayor Harrell on the campaign trail is why I say I'm a little bit surprised by this. But I think for a lot of people who probably didn't vote for Mayor Harrell, I think are feeling pleasantly surprised by this choice.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I wonder if this is at least in part a response to what the city council has been pressuring for when it comes to Vision Zero over the past several months here. Tammy Morales from District 2, where she actually ran against Bruce Harrell several years ago as a council candidate. And Bruce Harrell won that, but Morales now has that seat. I really see that pressure from the council and from the surrounding neighborhoods here to really ramp up this safety issue, Aaron. So I'm bringing this up because the council has to do this review over the next couple of weeks of Greg Spots as a candidate. What's going to happen there? Does his candidacy fly through, or what do you think that process is going to be like?
I haven't seen any kind of major, I haven't found any kind of major red flags or anything that would suggest that his nomination is going to be held up. I'm sure Councilmember Peterson, who's the chair of the committee, will have some tough questions for him, but his kind of vision seems to align, I would say, with a lot of what I've heard from members of the council. The fact that his nomination came on one of, or maybe the second hottest day of the year, also seemed to kind of fit in because in LA he launched this big sort of, or at least kind of oversaw this big kind of cooling, painting streets in a way that didn't reflect back as much heat, and planting a lot of
Yeah.
trees. And I think with the heat dome of last year and the recent heat wave we just had, has been a lot of conversation about equity when it comes to who gets hit the hardest during heat waves. And
Yeah.
we basically know the answer to that, which is
Yeah.
poorer and communities of color.
Mhm.
And so the fact that he has done this work in LA and is being introduced as it's hitting 90 degrees, I
Yeah.
think that also is probably not a coincidence.
No.
And it's also something that I think probably a lot of members of the council will appreciate. But
Yeah.
we'll see. Things always come up in nomination
Of course.
confirmation hearings, and we'll see what those are.
Yeah, certainly is talking a lot about climate change, and that'll be an important piece of it, I think, from the council's perspective too. One last bit on this: is there something in your mind, just looking at whatever candidate tackles this job, what is that top priority? Is it figuring out the Move Seattle levy, or what do you think is the top priority for whoever comes in on this job?
Yeah, I think as far as, I think there's this sort of large scale top priority, which I would say is probably safety. In fact, he
Yeah.
said that's his top priority is safety.
Mhm.
But as far as like a specific priority, the Move Seattle levy is fairly specific because
Yeah.
it ends in 2024, and so they're going to have to get and if they're going to run a campaign on this, it really begins the January 1st, 2024. So I guess he's got a year and a half to write this package. I think they're going to want to be pretty specific after last time when
it just did through on a lot of promises. Yeah.
And so I would think that would be, it's not like day one he has to start getting on that, but maybe second or third month once he's settled in and understands like the neighborhoods and the streets. I would think that he would start having those conversations pretty early.
Yeah, he's going to hear about it on day one. And if he is confirmed there, and we'll see what happens with that whole process. But the West Seattle Bridge will open, it looks like, in September here at some point. So he'll have a lot to talk about there, too. So thank you for breaking down that piece with me. I wanted to talk about one more issue that the mayor has been talking about a lot over this past week: an executive order to the SPD that all sexual assault felonies with the proper amount of evidence, he says, be assigned to detectives by the end of August. Now, advocates, as we know, have been pushing for this for months, even longer than that, actually, but definitely for months after this memo that was published by the Seattle Times and KUOW that showed SPD stopped investigating most new sex assault cases involving adults this year. I'm wondering, though, David, what this really means, because the SPD's staffing issues haven't magically gone away, and I'm not sure if all these cases will actually get assigned. I'm just trying to figure out what's going to happen here. What happens next?
I think what happens next is the police department is going to have to make some choices about who's doing what and where. You're right. I don't think this does not magically solve any staffing shortages, but what it is doing is saying, I understand there are staffing shortages, and also you need to prioritize these. And so it's kind
put
of
some
an
pressure
ultimatum
on for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's setting the priority in a pretty specific way. I doubt the police department is happy about this because they have countered into the story that this is a staffing issue and you can't just shift people around, that it requires specialized training to do this. But I think it's sort of the mayor has recognized that this is a highly sensitive and important topic, that a lot of people are not getting the sort of due diligence and justice that they deserve, and has decided that this should take priority over possibly some other things. And what those other things are, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. No, it is interesting to watch this, because I think you would hear from advocates that even before the pandemic, this was an issue. A lot of victims coming forward and cases not getting investigated, and that has really dropped off during the pandemic here over the past several years as the SPD has lost officers. I wonder if it becomes part of the case that the SPD is going to make when it comes to, and the mayor is going to make when it comes to, hey, police need more funding. If we're really going to get honest about making sure we're investigating these cases involving sexual assault, we're going to need some more dollars. We're going to need some more officers and more money for training. I feel like that might all come together here too, David.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. The challenge is even if they have the money, can they actually get the people?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we have seen this and talked about this before, but police departments are competing fairly stringently, and especially for, a detective,
A specialized. Yeah.
somebody who's specialized and in theory has, because you don't just hire someone as a detective.
No. No.
People end up detectives after being officers or patrol officers for a while. So
Yeah. Right.
I do think it's a decent question about whether or not, where you get more people to do that. But I mean, I think there's sometimes there are times for nuance, and there are times for
Yeah.
kind of
Let's get it
slamming
done.
the foot
Yeah.
down and saying, let's get it done. And in this
Yeah.
case, when you're talking about sexual assault cases, clearly it's if these cases are not even being assigned, that is
Yeah.
comes across as a pretty serious abdication of some of the basic duties of you would think of a law enforcement agency.
Absolutely true. And we can see the mayor reacting to that too. Well, thanks for breaking that down with me, David. All right. Well, up next, we all know that sharing is caring, but car sharing, at least in some Seattle neighborhoods, well, they don't care for it much at all. David's got the story on Transportation Talk. David, I thought you had a fascinating piece in the Seattle Times about car sharing. We're not talking about the Zipcar app that a lot of people are familiar with, but peer-to-peer car sharing, as it's called, through an app called Turo. Now, most people who serve on as hosts on Turo, and I'm reading this from your article here, own only one or two cars, but some people are treating this more like a business, and that's made for a few ruffled feathers in the neighborhoods here. What's happening?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, so this model, people call it the kind of Airbnb of cars. I think that's the
Right.
fastest way of describing it, which is
Yeah.
when it came around, and it's sort of 2010, Turo came on, and then in Seattle it showed up in 2012. So it's not actually that new. But when it showed up, it was in the same way that Airbnb started as, hey, you can rent out your room to a traveler for cheap or whatever.
Hmm.
The same way, it was this model of, hey, you've got this car, it probably sits idle for most of the time. You can make a couple extra bucks by renting it out. Or if someone needs a truck and you've got a truck, you don't have to ask a friend to help you move. And
Yeah.
for years, that really was kind of the driving force behind this. But sort of organically, a few people, especially around 2017, 2018, started to figure out that they could actually make pretty good money doing this, and started buying up cars to do more than just their extra underused vehicle.
Hmm.
And then in just the last year, Turo in particular, there are two of these companies, Turo and GetAround. I focus more on Turo because it's bigger and has been around longer. But
Yeah.
Turo in particular has kind of recognized that, hey, we can actually make a lot more money and become a lot more professionalized based off of these sort of professional hosts. These people are
Yeah.
actually intentionally buying cars in order to rent them.
Yep.
And they have also not coincidentally recently filed to go public on Wall Street, to become a publicly
Yeah.
traded company. And so
That's right.
they have actually made an intentional shift just in the last year to encourage people to do this kind of thing. And so
Hmm.
we've seen pretty massive increases in the number of hosts who are buying up large numbers of cars and renting them out, and at least so far appear to be making pretty good money doing it.
Doing it. Yeah.
So it's a very interesting shift. It feels like we're kind of in that limbo period that maybe Airbnb was in maybe 6 or 7 years ago, when it was transitioning into this kind of more professionalized hotel industry.
Right.
Of course, with that comes some conflict. I think, yeah. So there's this one guy that I talked to for a while. He lives in Laurelhurst, and he has all these cars. His neighbors are basically pissed off at him.
Sure.
For parking these cars around the neighborhood. The city investigated and found he wasn't actually breaking any rules. I think the neighbors would kind of counter that, well, then the rules should change.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think there's something also particularly salient about it because it's in one of Seattle's fanciest neighborhoods, Laurelhurst.
Yeah. Go figure.
But I mean, I think there's the kind of small scale question around these neighbor to neighbor conflict. But then, to me, in some ways, the more interesting part is this larger scale economy that appears to be building around this peer-to-peer car sharing. That really, while other modes of transportation got hurt during the pandemic, this actually was really helped by the pandemic because people wanted their own cars to be able to get out of town for a few days. And so, I will be very curious to see if, like Airbnb and Uber and Lyft, it becomes bigger and bigger business in the next few years, and then how a city like Seattle reacts and starts thinking about regulating it.
Yeah, so many different things to think about. Car sharing, automated cars. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces of regulation that the city needs to look at from a transportation perspective. But David, thank you for breaking that down. We need to wrap up the show here. And a quick check of your eagle eye on gas prices here. I think you've seen this, and I have too. They're coming down, but not as quickly in some areas as compared to others. What are you seeing there? What's going on?
Yeah, it just strikes me that before there'd be maybe a 50-cent variation between gas
Hmm.
stations depending on where you are, but I'm seeing more and more. I think the biggest difference I saw, I tweeted this, was the Suquamish Indian Reservation near where I live. They have gas at 4.25, and then I took the
Wow.
ferry into Edmonds, and there was a gas station on the other side there that had gas at 5.40. So that's a
Wow.
$1.20
Yeah.
difference or so. And it seems like some gas stations are eager to drop their prices as the price of oil comes down, while others seem to
Hmm.
be kind of holding out a little bit longer and seeing if they can
Wow.
keep selling the gas at
Yeah.
that price. So yeah, it's interesting.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But man, I got to take a trip over that reservation at some point, if only to see that on a sign that
Yeah.
gas only costs 4.25. So thank you as always, David. Thanks to everybody listening. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on all the major platforms. Once again, if you are a listener, please support the show on Patreon. Always appreciated. Thanks for watching on Converge, too. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.